Are you looking for a way to deepen your faith? Do you want to find more time for your spiritual practice? Are you ready to make some changes in order to follow Jesus more closely? If so, then this video is for you. We'll explore the cost of following Jesus and how removing distractions can help us on our journey. The cost of following Jesus. As we explore the cost of following Jesus, we must first understand what it truly means to follow him. According to Luke 9 verses 57 to 62, following Jesus means changing our place, blowing up relationships, and avoiding distraction from faith. This can be a difficult thing to do, as it requires sacrifice. We must be willing to give up our comfort and security and prioritize what matters most. By minimizing distractions, we can make room for God in our lives and find purpose and joy in serving others. We may also find strength in our weaknesses and overcome temptation, ultimately fulfilling our calling. The rewards of following Jesus are great, and by living in obedience, we can trust God's plan and find peace in the process. What does it mean to follow Jesus? Following Jesus doesn't mean only giving up our own desires, but also understanding and accepting his plan for our lives. Jesus calls us to deny ourselves, take up our cross and follow him, Matthew 16 verse 24. This means that we must be willing to surrender our lives to him completely, trusting that his plan is better than our own. We must accept that following Jesus means doing things we may not like or understand, but that he has promised to never leave us or forsake us, Hebrews 13 verse 5. We must trust in God's faithfulness and his promises, even when we can't see the outcome. When we surrender to Jesus, we are committing to walk in obedience and faith, which brings joy and peace. Cost of following Jesus. Removing distraction. In Luke 9 verses 57 to 62, Jesus highlighted the high cost of following him. We can see from this passage that following Jesus requires us to remove distractions from our lives so that we can focus on him and his mission. Distractions can come in many forms, such as relationships, hobbies, and commitments that take up our time and energy. It is important to recognize these distractions and to make room for God by minimizing them. This can seem daunting and overwhelming, but it is worthwhile to make the effort and prioritize what matters most. When we make the sacrifice to remove distractions, we can find purpose and joy in serving others. We can also find strength in our weaknesses and be equipped to overcome temptation and fulfill our calling. It is only in obedience and trust in God's plan that we can experience the rewards of following Jesus. Understanding the necessity of sacrifice. When Jesus calls us to follow him, he also calls us to make sacrifices. In Luke 9 verses 57 to 62, Jesus talks about the cost of following him, a cost that includes leaving behind our comforts and security. The journey of following Jesus can be difficult, but it is also rewarding. To understand the necessity of sacrifice, we must remember that while Jesus calls us to leave behind some things, he also gives us something greater in return. The joy of fulfilling our purpose. Sacrificing the things that bring us pleasure, security, and comfort is not easy, but when we make that sacrifice for the sake of following Jesus, we are rewarded with far greater riches. We gain a deep understanding of his grace and love, and a newfound perspective on the world. We also find strength in our weaknesses and discover the beauty of obedience. By sacrificing what we think we need, we can make room for God and the things that truly matter. Sacrificing comfort and security. Sacrificing comfort and security is an important part of following Jesus. It can be difficult to give up our own comfort and security in order to follow him. However, it is essential for us to do so if we want to fully follow him. We must be willing to let go of our material possessions, our pride, and our need for control, and instead focus on serving God and others. We must be willing to face hardships and persecution, as Jesus himself did, and trust that he will provide for us in the end. Sacrificing our comfort and security is a necessary part of following Jesus and will bring us closer to him as we do so. Using time wisely. Prioritizing what matters most. Following Jesus requires us to use our time wisely and prioritize what matters most. we must learn to prioritize time spent with God, as this is the foundation of a strong relationship with Him. Additionally, it is important to spend time in prayer and study the Bible, as these activities will help us to know and understand God's will for our lives. When we make time for God, we are removing distractions and making room for Him. We can also use our time to serve others in need, as this is a tangible way to demonstrate our love and obedience to God. By intentionally spending time in God's presence and prioritizing what matters most to Him, we can be sure that our lives will be used for His glory. Making room for God by minimizing distractions. In Luke 9 verses 57 to 62, we see that when we follow Jesus, it often involves a high cost. This cost can be seen in the way we sacrifice comfort and security for a greater purpose, prioritize what matters most, and make room for God by minimizing distractions. By minimizing distractions, we can make room for God in our lives and focus on following Him. We can do this by setting boundaries and limits on what we allow ourselves to become distracted by, such as social media, video games, or other non-essential activities. We can also find purpose and joy in serving others, finding strength in weakness, and overcoming temptation. Ultimately, the cost of following Jesus is worth it because of the rewards of living in obedience and trusting God's plan. Finding purpose and joy in serving others. As followers of Jesus, we are called to serve others with unconditional love. Following Jesus means that we are to put other people's needs before our own. This can be difficult, but it also brings great joy and purpose to our lives. When we put others first, we are reminded of God's love for us. We are able to show others the same love and compassion that God has shown us. We can also find joy in doing good work and helping others. Serving others with love and kindness will bring us closer to God and will help us to become more mature in our faith. The rewards of following Jesus. Choosing to follow Jesus can seem like a daunting task, filled with hardship, sacrifice, and difficulty. But it is also a path filled with rewards. When we choose to follow Jesus, we open ourselves up to the power of His Spirit and His promises. We can experience the joy of being a part of Christ's kingdom, of being a part of something much greater than ourselves. We can find strength and courage in our times of weakness. We can find fulfillment in our purpose and calling, and we can experience the peace that comes from living in obedience to God's will. Ultimately, the rewards of following Jesus are much greater than the cost. When we put aside the distractions of this world and focus on our relationship with Him, we can experience life to the fullest. Finding strength in weakness. Following Jesus can be challenging and difficult, but it is also a source of great strength. When we remove distractions and focus on Jesus, we find that He has the power to help us overcome any obstacles that stand in our way. He gives us the courage and strength to endure whatever challenges come our way, and He equips us with the tools to handle any situation. When we face our weaknesses and surrender them to Him, we find the strength in Him to overcome them. Knowing that Jesus is with us every step of the way gives us the confidence to pursue our purpose and mission. By following Jesus, we gain strength and find encouragement in Him that helps us live a life of faith and obedience. Overcoming temptation and fulfilling your calling. When we choose to follow Jesus, we are presented with many temptations and distractions that can easily lead us astray. In Luke 9 verses 57 to 62, Jesus is approached by men who wish to follow Him, but they are distracted by the things of this world, such as material possessions and comfort. In the same way, when we choose to follow Jesus, there will be times when our focus is pulled away from Him. It is essential to recognize these temptations and to find ways to remain focused on Christ. One way to do this is to prioritize what matters most and to use our time wisely. We should make sure that God is at the center of our lives and that He is our primary focus. We must also make room for God by minimizing distractions and by serving others. When we make the commitment to follow Christ, it is important to remember the rewards that come from it and to focus on those. We must also find strength in our weaknesses, remain obedient to God, and trust in His plan. Overcoming temptation and fulfilling our calling as followers of Christ is an ongoing process, but it is one that is well worth the effort. Living in obedience and trusting God's plan. Living in obedience and trusting God's plan is an essential part of the cost of following Jesus. The Bible teaches us that when we obey God's commands and trust in His plans, we will be blessed. This may require us to step out of our comfort zone or face difficult situations, but God promises that He will be with us and will provide us with strength and wisdom. We can trust in His promises and remain faithful to His word. When we do this, we can experience the joy and peace that comes from knowing that we are following God's will for our lives. Conclusion. As we have seen, the cost of following Jesus is great and it requires sacrifice. But it is worth it in the end. Removing distractions and sacrificing comfort and security make room for God in our lives and enable us to find purpose and joy in serving others. Following Jesus is a journey of obedience and trust in God's plan and finding strength in our weaknesses. As we take up our crosses and follow Jesus, we will find strength, hope, and joy in the journey.